How's it going, everybody? My name is Ryan Reyes, otherwise known as Sector 7. Welcome to my channel, Sector 7 Music. I am a film and video game composer as well as sound designer. So today what I wanted to do is discuss some theory behind Final Fantasy VII's main theme. The reason being is because Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is just over the horizon with its initial release, and I thought it would be a good idea to discuss Final Fantasy VII's main theme and some theory behind it. Check out my website, sector7music.com. There I have a new blog page coming out. You can check out a lot of my thoughts, things on theory, instruments, all sorts of different video game and film scores. What I'm going to do is just read the introduction for you, the theory behind Final Fantasy VII's main theme. I do have some visuals as well too. I thought it would be fun to put in some new pictures. This one in particular is one of my favorites because it does show the entire clan just looking out over the horizon, since it is going to be an incredible sandbox open world game. I am very excited. This picture does not do it justice. Final Fantasy VII, without a doubt, is my favorite piece of media of all time. Since its initial release on January 31st, 1997, this RPG masterpiece has given me such profound inspiration, not only in my life, but in my art and music as well. It has inspired me in such ways that I can confidently say that it has influenced my creative and artistic views overall. One aspect of this magnificent tale is the beautiful music of Final Fantasy VII. The soundtrack's main composer, Nobuo Uematsu, sets a masterclass of music composition in his writings. Listening to the soundtrack is an institution of video game music writing as a genre altogether. Today, I want to discuss one of video games' greatest musical pieces ever written, Final Fantasy VII's main theme and the theory behind its awe-inspiring melody. Written by beloved and legendary video game music composer Nobuo Uematsu, Final Fantasy VII's main theme takes you on a journey from wonderment and amazement to an ominous feeling of doom and despair. This was intentional considering the game's plot and premise of the lore. It's not until hours into the game when you hear the main theme for the first time, but there are leitmotifs and evidence of it littered beforehand and throughout. This is such a powerful way to express the game's emotion, atmosphere, and tone. There are so many things to discover when analyzing his music, but more specifically the main theme. In my own pursuit of researching the main theme, I quickly found out how incredible the theory was behind it, and I wanted to share. I'm writing this blog in hopes that it will help you in your music composition and give you the same inspiration that it once gave me. Okay guys, so moving on, I really do encourage you to listen to the Final Fantasy VII main theme, specifically the main theme that came out for the original game back in 1997. Part 1. That's one small step for man. Intervals in stepwise motion. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. This quote by philosopher Lao Tzu has never rung more true than it does in the context of walking on the world map for the first time and listening to the main melody of Final Fantasy VII. With so much story to tell in the future ahead, just like the game, our melody starts with stepwise motion. First, let's talk about intervals. What are intervals? Intervals is referring to the distance between two notes. There are two ways to think about this. One, if the interval is no more than 2 consecutive steps, then this is stepwise motion, and 2, if any interval that is more than that, it is considered a skip or a leap. For example, if your note is A and your next note is B, then this is stepwise motion. If your note is A and your target note is D, then this is a leap. I want to discuss how Nobuo Uematsu uses these practices and how meticulously he balances both leaps and stepwise motion. In the main theme of Final Fantasy VII, Uematsu-san does both of these techniques, and he does them very well. Nobuo Uematsu is a self-taught musician who very clearly knows his way around a theory book or two. When writing melodies, Uematsu-san does something called voice leading or part writing. This refers to the notes and chords in a progression to be written as smoothly as possible using mostly stepwise motion. Each chord has a composite voicing, and each voice or note has its own independent movement. This is so that when you go from one voice or chord to the next, they are simply singable and easy to remember. On this subject, I was always told to remember the less distance, the better. When done this way, chord progressions have a much more pleasing and sensible harmony to the ear. Let's take a look at the example of the main melody of Final Fantasy VII. Here we have the Final Fantasy VII main theme, specifically the main theme to the original Final Fantasy VII game. In this example, we can see stepwise motion in action with the first 3 notes. In this first example, let's take a look at the first 3 notes of the main melody. Starting on the root note, or tonic in conventional harmony, E is the key note. Since we're in the scale of E major, the melody plays the first 3 notes of the E major scale, E, F sharp, and G. As you can see right here, E, F sharp, and G are played in stepwise motion. Uematsu-san goes for an easy beginning and uses stepwise motion to start off our journey. Easy to sing, easy to hum. If the skips and leaps were used right off the bat, the melody would come off disjointed and unappealing, making it difficult to follow along. As listeners, it would be better to have a melody that is pleasing to the ear, especially in the context of how the main melody is used in Final Fantasy VII. When we hear it for the first time, players arrive on the world map. There are so many emotions that the player is experiencing, the last thing we need is a disconjointed feeling coming from the melody. There is nothing like hearing a good piece of music and then jolted out of the suspension of disbelief because something doesn't hit your ear in the right way. Instead, we hear something that is easy flowing and smooth in accompaniment with the story, the plot, and atmosphere of the game. Using stepwise motion, the melody is easy to follow. It tells a story in tandem with the visuals on screen without demanding the listener's full detailed attention. However, it is not to say that Nobuo Uematsu doesn't use leaps, but when he does, it is in a very precise and meaningful way. Alright guys, so to summarize part 1, intervals in stepwise motion. Let's just say you are on the tonic and you want to go up to the supertonic or down to the leading tone. It doesn't matter as long as you're going up or down within the notes of the scale that you are using. That is stepwise motion. So let's just say again you're going from the second to the third, that is stepwise motion. Or you're going from the second to the third to the fourth to the fifth. Again, stepwise motion. Now, intervals are the distance between the notes. So if you're on the tonic and you want to go up to the supertonic, you're using stepwise motion. Now, if you're going from the tonic to, let's just say, the dominant, then you're using a skip or a leap. Part 2. One giant leap for mankind. Leaps and skips. Next, let's take a look at the second part of this melody. From the G sharp, we get a leap. But wait, I thought you said leaps can be disjointed and unappealing. This is true if done in the wrong way. Uematsu-san does something very impressive here. He adds leaps in just the right way and does not overuse them. This, in fact, lands on the D sharp and is a major 7th interval, which is one of the highest leaps you could write. The prominent idea Nobuo Uematsu had surrounding Final Fantasy VII's soundtrack was using 7th chords and 7th intervals within its music. This is the central motif to the world and is beautifully written. Suffice it to say, it was because Final Fantasy VII was the 7th entry in the franchise, but also due to the rich and distinct tonality the 7th interval offers. This is what gives Final Fantasy VII its unique sound and is a genius way to approach musical concepts. It's also how he uses the major 7th leap that is so brilliant. From the major 7th leap, we immediately go back down a step to the C sharp, as if to say, you took a meaningful jump forward, now step back to familiarity. When you take a leap such as this, it would be a smart move to go back down in a stepwise motion, ideally in the opposite direction. This is a clever method on how to balance out such a huge leap. You want to have stepwise motion downward and not stray too far off from the tonic or tonal center. Alright guys, so to summarize part 2, leaps and skips. What Nobuo Uematsu does here is he goes from a G sharp all the way to a D sharp, and that is a pretty big skip or a big leap. Now, if it was at the beginning of the melody, I'm sure he can find a way to actually make it make sense. But since he's following that up with stepwise motion, and then he does such a big leap, going back down using stepwise motion can make it that much more palatable for the listener. So what Nobuo Uematsu does here is very impressive, and he does it in such a way that it actually makes sense with the melody. Rather than coming off disjointed and unappealing, it actually comes off very smooth and singable because he doesn't use so many leaps. He uses stepwise motion, puts in a leap, and then uses stepwise motion again. So in this next part, I go off into a little bit of a side quest here. Basically, I wanted to discuss something that was just on my mind at that point in time that I thought would be pretty fun to put into this blog. But basically, it is side quest 1. It's not the destination, it's the journey. Another way to think of scale degrees. So this right here was something that was mentioned to me by a professor in college a long time ago, and it just has stuck with me ever since. Experiencing the journey is every bit as important as its destination. Comparatively, this relates to the scale degrees within a key and the position that they hold. A scale degree refers to the position and placement of a note within the scale relative to the tonic. So, as it goes, the first scale degree is called the tonic. The second degree is referred to as the supertonic, and also kind of sounds like something that increases your stat boost. The third scale degree is called the mediant, while the fourth and fifth are labeled as the subdominant and dominant respectively. The last two scale degrees are the sixth and seventh and are referred to as the submediant and the leading tone. I like to think of these scale degrees as your position while traveling upon a journey. Alright, as you can see here, we have the Chocobo Farmhouse, original Final Fantasy VII. I took these pictures while playing the OG Final Fantasy VII on my phone. So as you can see, we have pictures from the Chocobo Farmhouse, the grasslands, and the Midgardsollum Swamp, as well as the Midgardsollum Cave. In this example, let's use locations within the world of Final Fantasy VII and travel from the Chocobo Farm, or home, to the Midgardsollum Cave, our destination, or, in music terminology, the tonic to the leading tone. You start your journey off at the Chocobo Farmhouse, i.e. the tonic. Next, you go to the stables, and while you're there, maybe pet some chocobos. That would be your second scale degree. From there, your third would be stepping up to the gate right before the grasslands, and fourth would be the grasslands where the chocobo tracks are located. Next would be the dominant fifth, right at the swamp where the Midgardsollum resides. The sixth would be the grassy area between the swamp and the Midgardsollum Cave entrance, and the leading tone, the seventh, would be at the Midgardsollum Cave itself. So right here I have a picture of fighting the Midgardsollum, demonstrating that between two destinations, a lot can happen. The same thing with scale degrees. Between your tonic and your leading tone, there's a lot of story to be told within those scale degrees. For those of you who played the original Final Fantasy VII, you would know that so much has happened between these two locations. From the Chocobo Farmhouse to the Midgardsollum Cave, there's a story to tell from the distance traveled. The same can be said when referring to scale degrees. This is a good way to think about scale degrees when composing. It can give you some context as to how far you stray away from your home key. So again, guys, I kind of go off the rails right there, but I digress. Stepping downward from such a high leap, in this case, the 7th scale degree, is a very masterful way of melody writing. Placing appropriate leaps within your melody can take your listener to unexpected places, and when accompanied with stepwise motion, this can make your melody something to remember. It is that major 7th leap that hits your ear in just the right way and makes the listener want to sing along. Next, let's take a look at the third part and see what Nobuo Uematsu does to answer the first half of the melody. So, to summarize Side Quest 1, another way to think of scale degrees is that the further along or the farther you get from your tonic, there's more story to be told there. As you can tell, if you go from the tonic to the supertonic, then it gives it a little bit of tension. There's tension there. If you go from the supertonic to the mediant, then there's even more tension there. There's even some less stable ground. Same thing with the fifth to the sixth. And then from your leading tone to your tonic is going to give you even more tension that wants to resolve. So your leading tone definitely wants to resolve to your tonic. Now, using these scale degrees can make your music tell a tale, tell a story. And within these scale degrees, they have certain properties that actually tell whether they are happy or sad, or in other words, they tell if they are minor or major. Okay, moving on. Part 3, question and answer. A period in music. As we saw in the first half of Final Fantasy VII's main melody, Nobuo Uematsu composed using stepwise motion, then took a leap to new places. Well, where do we go from there? Back towards the beginning, of course. Take a look at the next example to see how Uematsu-san wrote this other half. So as you can see in the example here, Nobuo Uematsu uses stepwise motion again to start the second half of the melody. So as you can see, we're doing familiar things here, almost like he is repeating what he did in the first half, but in a different way. It leads us back to where we began. In composing music, there are ways to construct melodic lines and phrases by something we call question and answering, or a period in music terminology. A period in music refers to the first part of a musical idea or phrase feeling unfinished, to which the second phrase finishes it. The first section acts as a question and the second part answers. Another term for this can be labeled is call and response. Though there is more to it, we'll just cover the basics for now. Since the first half of the melody ended on the 6th scale degree, there was no real definite feeling of completion. To remedy this, Nobuo Uematsu answers back by starting the melody over again, reminiscing where we first began. This makes the melody easy to digest, and with less notes to remember, it is easily singable. After a brief rest, we find ourselves back at the tonic center. Again, we start at home key E, then to the supertonic F sharp, and then finishing with the mediant G sharp. Going back down to our tonal center is another great way composers tell the listener what key they are in. This also sets up expectation to go to a familiar place we've been before, like taking a leap to the 7th scale degree once again. But it's what Uematsu-san does next that really takes the listener and the melody to the next level. Alright, so to summarize, part 3, a period in music. A period is basically a question and answer. So let's just say you start on the tonic and then you finish that first half of the melody on a 5th or a 6th. This doesn't have so much ground to feel finite. It actually feels a little unstable, almost like a question. This is where the second part of the melody comes in. The second part of the melody answers the first part of the melody. You can answer the first part of the melody by going to a more stable note, as of the tonic. Part 4, doing more of the same, but different. Creative writing. One thing composers do very well is set up expectation. There are so many ways to do this, for example, like using a deceptive cadence, in which I'll be talking about later on. The way Nobuo Uematsu does this is by composing another well-placed leap in the second part of the melody, but not as far of a leap like in the first half. Instead of skipping to a major 7th, Uematsu-san skips up to the 5th scale degree, the dominant, or B. This is incredible storytelling from a composer's point of view, and a masterful way of melody writing. As you can see from this example here, instead of going up to the 7th scale degree, we go to the 5th scale degree. We don't go as far. He knew with great precision where and how to place this leap. By composing a leap in the first half of this melody and quoting it again in the second half in a creative, different way, this is answering at its finest. The dominant is not as stable as the tonic, but it can still act as an anchor of sorts. For instance, it can be used as a question mark without completing the musical idea as a whole. That's why going up to a dominant can give a sense that the ending or a conclusion is nearby. From there, Uematsu-san yet again goes downward, this time to the subdominant or the fourth scale degree. He uses stepwise motion downward just like he did in the first leap. This is giving us a sense that we'll be back at our home key, continuing the journey and making the steps to do so. But first, there's yet another technique Uematsu-san does that shows off his composing style that is simple yet very effective. Alright guys, so to summarize part 4, creative writing, basically Nobuo Uematsu is answering again the first half of the melody. But this time, he's actually doing something a little different. He then does another leap, but this time not as far as he did in the first half of the melody. Instead of leaping to the 7th scale degree, he leaps to the 5th scale degree. And just like in the first half of the melody, he steps down again, but instead of going from the 7th to the 6th, he goes from the 5th to the 4th. This is basically doing the same thing, but a little different. Part 5. There and back again. Appoggiatura to the tonal center. In the example above, we can see that Nobuo Uematsu finishes off the melody with what we call an appoggiatura, or from the Italian word appoggiare, or to lean. This is when you have an ornamental note or a grace note resolving into a principal note, usually by stepwise motion. In the last portion of the Final Fantasy VII main melody, Uematsu-san does this to complete the musical idea and give it a sense of finality and fulfillment. One of the best ways to resolve a cadence is either the 7 to a 1 or the 2 to a 1. Reason being is because the 7 chord or the 2 has incredible tension and wants to be resolved. What better way to resolve these 2 scale degrees than to go straight to your home key? If we just ended on the tonic after the 4th scale degree, then the piece would sound abrupt and rushed. What Uematsu-san does instead is go down to the tonic, then goes up to the 2nd scale degree, then goes back down to the tonic again. This is his use of an appoggiatura and finalizes the melody with 2nd scale degree tension. We can see that the melody is taking us back to the tonal center, the note E. In the melody, E is played a total of 4 times. That is the most out of any other note within the melody. Ideally, in melody writing, you want to start and end with the key that you are in. This makes it easier for the listener to capture that feeling of the E major scale. Nobuo Uematsu knew this by placing so many E notes within the melody. Since the scale being E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, and D sharp, the listener becomes familiar with the music of the E major scale. Composers have a way to control what the listener hears and even feels, which brings me to my next topic, chords. Alright guys, so to summarize part 5, an appoggiatura is taking a grace note or an ornamental note and resolving it into a principal note, usually by stepwise motion. One good way is going from the 7 to the 1 or the 2 to the 1 to give it a sense of finality. So I also go into something called the tonal center here. The tonal center is basically the principal key that your scale is in. So this could be your tonic. For instance, this example shows in the E major scale, E would be my tonal center. Since Nobuo Uematsu wants the listener to listen to E to get used to that E major scale, he puts the E note in there a total of 4 times. That way, the tonal center is very pronounced. Part 6. Expect the unexpected. Chords and cadences. A good chunk of Final Fantasy VII's main theme is written in E, and there's about 1 bar in the entire piece that is outside of those notes. Constraint can make beautiful music because it can spark creativity and imagination. Nobuo Uematsu demonstrates how he uses constraint within the main theme. Since the pitches of the E major scale are written as E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, and D sharp, then those pitches have a specific relationship tied to them. Written with traditional Roman numerals, the relationship would look like this: E major 1, F sharp minor 2, G sharp minor 3, A major 4, B major 5, C sharp minor 6, and D sharp diminished would be 7. If the Roman numeral is in the capital lettering, then you're in the major key. If it is in lowercase lettering, then you're in a minor or diminished key. Each Roman numeral has an assigned scale degree, and this relationship is used for all major scales. You heard that right. It doesn't matter which major key you're in. The Roman numeral and the relationship stays the same. It's different with the minor scale, but that's an explanation for another time. This is really great information for those who would like to build chords. When building a chord, you now can identify what the chord's relationship is with the scale degree itself. So if you wanted to write a chord progression using only major chords of the E major scale, you would use the scale degrees 1, 4, 5, and back to 1 to achieve this. Or you can write a chord progression using only the minor chords. That would look like this. 2 would be an F sharp minor, G sharp minor would be a 3, and a 6 would be a C sharp minor. Either way, the recipe stays the same, and now you know what chords to use. Composers such as Nobuo Uematsu use methods like this to structure their pieces and to tell the tale of the music that they're writing. The main melody does this and even goes a little further. Borrowed chords are chords that are not in the same key or scale, but still have a relation to it. Using borrowed chords in a chord progression can give the melody dynamic, uniqueness, and can take the listener to unexpected places. The main melody of Final Fantasy VII borrows from the parallel minor key, E minor, and plays a flat 6th and a flat 7th chord. Not only is this a very popular cadence, just listen to the fanfare at the end of the level of the original Super Mario Bros. For the NES, but it fits so well within the melody. Not only do the chords have their own individual purposes, but together they can produce cadences as well. Cadences, built off of the chords you use, can bring a sense of finality and conclusion to the melody. A composer's job is to create emotion within the music, and using chords to describe those emotions can play with the listener's expectations. A cadence that creates a feeling of completion by going from the dominant back to the tonic, that is called an authentic cadence. An authentic cadence is when a musical piece ends from a 5 to a 1 chord progression. This cadence is a very popular chord progression amongst writers because of a strong foundation and a sense of fulfillment to the listener. In the Final Fantasy VII theme, it is very noticeable and has a strong musical presence at the end portion of the melody. But the reason why Uematsu-san does this is partly to set up expectation for the listener. What he does next is called a deceptive cadence. This is when you do not resolve the tonic from the 5 chord. Doing this tricks the listener into expecting an authentic cadence, but instead, he used another chord that is unexpected. This is where being a composer is really fun and allows you to go into a multitude of musical directions. Writing this way can take the listener on a profound spiritual journey and can lead to new directions to tell your tale. Final Fantasy VII's main theme does both and achieves exactly this. To reiterate, Nobuo Uematsu builds upon the excitement and movement of the piece and then writes a 5 to 1 cadence to give a feeling of resolution. He then plays the melody again, but instead going back to the 1 chord, Nobuo Uematsu ends on a minor 4 chord. Talk about leaving us hanging. But by doing this, the next part makes so much more sense. Ominously so. All right, guys. And so to reiterate or to summarize part six, expect the unexpected. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is every scale degree has either a major, minor, or diminished quality to it. When you build these, you actually can get some really interesting chord progressions. You can do all majors, you could do all minors, you could do mix. You can even go as far as even borrow some from different parallel minors, relative majors. You can do all sorts of things as long as you know what kind of quality you are using for your chords. So then to go even further than that, we have different chord progressions that cause cadences. Cadences are basically to finite your melody itself or to take it to new places. What Nobuo Uematsu does here is he does use something called an authentic cadence, which actually gives it a very strong ground and finishing feel to it. And he actually goes off into a different direction, which makes the listener kind of expect that strong foundation, but all of a sudden it takes you somewhere further with something called a deceptive cadence. All right, we are on our last part here, part 7, ostinati, ostinatos. Every time I hear my favorite Star Wars theme, Duel of Fates by legendary composer John Williams, I think of the word ostinato. An ostinato is a musical phrase or rhythm that is repeated. It is what Duel of Fates is notably known for. I encourage you to go listen to it before reading on for a better understanding. When you listen to this piece, you can hear it in the cellos, violins, and later on the woodwinds and brass sections. This rhythmic pattern you are hearing is played throughout the piece and is the very foundation for movement, excitement, and emotion. This next portion of the Final Fantasy VII main melody is a very important section of the piece. The melody goes from uplifting and emotionally beautiful to a foreboding feeling of distress and hopelessness. The underlining ostinati play by piano in a lower register, all the while an arpeggiated lead plays on top. This is an incredible dynamic and emotional section of the piece that again plays with the listener's expectations. To add to this roller coaster of theory and emotion, we are now in a minor key, and it is giving us more of an unnatural and foreign feeling than before. Nobuo Uematsu takes us to the parallel minor key to an E minor. A parallel minor key is built by 1. Being in a major key, and 2. Changing your home key or tonic from the major to a minor. So, since the melody is in E major, the relative minor would be E minor. That simple. This is an incredible way to build great dynamics, contrast, and tension. Going from E major to an E minor builds fantastic tension between the two parts. Playing this ostinato out in a chord form sounds very dissonant and unpleasing to the ear. But when put into an ostinato form, it creates the anxious feeling of uneasiness and tension. Nobuo Uematsu wanted it this way so that it would reflect the tone of the game. So, to summarize part 7, the ostinatos, Nobuo Uematsu in this next part uses ostinatos to set the tone of the next portion of the melody. Looking back at it, Nobuo Uematsu wrote these dissonant ostinatos in order to let the listener know that this world of Final Fantasy does have doom and despair within it. I also talk about going from the home key of E major down to its parallel minor, which is E minor. So if you take your tonic and switch that key from A major to a minor key, then that is your parallel minor. I go on to say that it can build great dynamics and contrast and tension if you pull from another scale. It being from a parallel minor, it's going to give you that great contrast and tension. All right, guys, thank you so much for letting me read this to you. I am very excited for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and doing this blog made me so happy. Go to my website, www.sector7music.com. That way you can read my summary of the whole article, as well as check out all the sites that I got some research from. So again, guys, thank you so much for joining me and letting me read this to you. My name is Ryan Reyes, otherwise known as Sector 7, and if you like what you see, if you like what you hear, go ahead and give a like to this video, subscribe, share it, comment, do whatever you can to help this channel grow, and I'll see you all again really soon.